In the spirit of reconciliation, Law Squared acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today.
Well, welcome everyone. My name is Cassandra Hatton and I am the Chief People and Capability Officer here at Law Squared, and we just want to say thank you so much for joining us today. We are talking all things crisis management. In 2026, crises do not build slowly. They escalate across social media, stakeholders and regulators, and for not-for-profits, the stakes are amplified, right? We have vulnerable communities, volunteer workforces, limited resources, and brands built on trust. So you can't simply pause operations and regroup. You need to protect people, maintain services, and hold the organisation steady all at the same time. So today we want to talk about crisis management, what actually works in practice when these things are unfolding. So we're going to talk about things like a crisis-ready governance framework, clear decision rights and escalation triggers, handling whistleblowing and people risks with integrity, and communications that are calm, timely and aligned. Most importantly, we'll finish with actions that you can actually take away in your organisations and use as these things are unfolding. So if you've joined a Law Squared webcast before, you already know the drill. Welcome back. And if this is your first webcast, we're so glad you joined us, and I'm sure it's going to be a super valuable time for you. So please add throughout the conversation any questions that you have for our speakers just straight into the chat, and our amazing moderator, Alicia, will gather all of these up and we will respond to your questions with answers and FAQs over the coming days. So let's get started and introduce our panel of experts. Firstly, I am thrilled to introduce you to Andrew Mackenzie, who is on the webcast with us today. He is the CEO of Word Investments. Word Investments began in 1975 as a way of supporting not-for-profit causes and charities. Over its duration, it's run several different business models, with the most successful of them being Bethel Funerals, which perhaps you've heard of, which began in 1997. Since then, it's distributed over $7 million to support mission, humanitarian and local causes. Incredible. As the CEO, Andrew focuses on the business operations while staying focused on the mission. This balance between future strategy, day-to-day commercial success, and long-term commitment to the organisation's purpose brings plenty of challenges and chances to get things wrong. What a bio. So welcome, Andrew. So great to have you here. We're collecting Andrews on the call today because we have another amazing Andrew who we all know as Andy Brooks. And Andy will be very well known to many of you on the call, having worked extensively as an employment law advisor to many of Law Squared's clients, both across the for-profit and not-for-profit sectors. He's also the driving force behind the library of all of the free legal resources aimed at helping organisations comply with employment legislation and emerging trends in the workplace. Some recent ones include Respect at Work and Psychosocial Hazards. And Andy delivers all of his wisdom in a way that is very unique to him, and he is very well loved. So great to have Andy on the call as well. And also we have one of our amazing lawyers, Tess, on the call. And Tess brings first-hand experience in crisis management and prevention as both a former regional head of legal and company secretary. So she's got a strong understanding of the in-house pressures and the board expectations that come along in these particular circumstances. Tess is experienced in providing practical and business-focused advice to commercial stakeholders and boards across a range of issues and areas of law. So welcome, Tess. It is so good. What a great panel to have for this conversation. We are going to get straight in and draw out all the wisdom we possibly can from this incredible panel. So let's start with the new crisis reality for not-for-profits. In 2026, a crisis is not just a bad day. They're often multifaceted. They have people, issues, safety, service continuity, governance, and reputation risks all at once. And the thing that makes not-for-profits different is that there is a trust mandate. So you're accountable to the community, to funders, to regulators, to donors, to staff, to volunteers, all in real time. So perhaps we could start with Andrew. From your perspective, what are you noticing at the moment about the types of crises that you're seeing more often? And why are they escalating so fast now?
Yeah, thanks, Cass. And you're right. I can give you many examples of when I think I've stuffed things up. So let's try to go the other way today and talk about when we've perhaps been able to make something good come out of it. Key thing, you've used the word a few times already, and it's the key thing I think, for the whole message today. It's all about trust. Trust, 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 trust. Yeah. And that's the lens that I would apply to any of the decisions to be made around what we're going to do. Because that trust is so slowly built, particularly for not-for-profits, and it's so quickly evaporated that addressing the trust issue with honesty, integrity, I would always say with a straight bat, in a way that meets the pub test, is really crucial. I think that nowadays what we're seeing in 2026, as you also said, is the speed with which these things can just take fire and run like crazy. In the old days, we used just to go about doing things, and if there was an issue, well, we'll deal with it at the time, and we'll deal with it in tomorrow's news cycle. And today, the news cycle, of course, is the next 60 seconds. So I think that's what we're seeing now, is the ability for these things to spring up and be out there before you might even know about it. And sometimes as the leader, it takes a while for the news to get to me. But when it does, normally I'm actually having to put out fires that have already erupted rather than just trying to deal with a clean sheet of paper and how might we go about addressing these things. So you've got to do it on the run. And I think that the speed is probably the biggest challenge we have to deal with in 2026, which says to me the antidote for that is having your game plan ready. If you don't got that, you got nothing. So get your game plan ready, and no doubt we'll talk today about what that looks like, and we'll give you some practical hints and tips about what that means so you can address them.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. What's that old saying, Andrew? Failing to plan is planning to fail, right? So I totally agree that having your game plan in place is so important. And if you're still delivering services while all of these things are unfolding, if a crisis hits, the complexity multiplies again, doesn't it? So I know that you've had quite a lot of experience in this kind of acute shock that can hit a not-for-profit during COVID, as an example. I know when you were leading a whole lot of the communications and response to maintaining services in that space. Could you share a little bit about that time and the challenges you faced while all of those things were unfolding?
Oh, you'll trigger me, Cass. I'll start twitching out of drink. That was a tough time, really. That was a draining time, and that was. You feel sorry for me. I had to listen intently to the then Premier's daily media conferences in great detail to be able to try and then take that information and communicate it to our people as well. And so part of our game plan around that was listening really carefully to what was going on. But I would start to write the playbook here. You know, one of the key things was always respond about people. Yeah. It's not about the institution. Institutions aren't relevant. They don't win. Nobody's interested in them. The media loves to pick on them. You know, if you're the AFL or the Catholic Church or the federal government, yeah, they rarely win. But it's the people who get the heart and get the story. And so for not-for-profits, always focus on the people and the impact that's happening. So when the crisis comes, sure, there's a crisis. You may have created it through your own organisation, through somebody's doing something, or it might have been something that was foisted upon you, like a COVID, but you've got to respond with the people heart. How does this affect our people? You've got to be on the front foot and say, yes, this is happening, but we're caring for our people first and foremost. If you lose that sight, and you lose that focus, you lose the comms war, and therefore you're behind the eight ball. So I think that during COVID, we learned really three things. Focus on the people and the impact that it was having on the people. Secondly, be consistent in your messaging. We were always very certain about coming out at 5 o'clock every afternoon with an update on your email. And sure, sometimes after months and months, we didn't hit 5 o'clock, but people got into a rhythm and they knew that we were on top of it, that we were responding, that we might not have had the answers today, but we were speaking into their space. Fill the voids that allows people to otherwise fill it with their own thinking or their gossip or their whispers. And thirdly, know very clearly who is speaking. Yeah. So in our case, make sure it's the CEO, given the seriousness of the issue, that's speaking. And work with your CEO in terms of the tone and the language and how they're presenting themselves. During COVID, it was not a time for the CEO to be leading with a soft, wishy-washy message. No, it actually needed a strong, very clear, quite a direct message about how this was enabling, what we were doing was enabling our people, empowering them to enable to continue the service of the not-for-profit, because that was the most important thing to all of those stakeholders. No matter what was happening, we were still making the impact on the ground. And without that, we would have lost our people, lost our volunteers, our donors, our supporters, etc. And it was actually the most positive story we could share. In a world of spin, it was pretty clear. No matter what's happened, our people are still delivering the services. Be thankful and grateful, and we're putting all the resources we have into ensuring that they're empowered to do so. So there you go. There's 3 or 4 things for the playbook to start to build it.
Excellent advice. Thank you so much, Andrew. Let's turn to Andy, because you talked a lot about how important the focus on people is. So Andy, as an employment lawyer, from a legal and people risk lens, what are you noticing about the types of crises that not-for-profits are more likely to face, and what tends to escalate them?
It's a really good question, and one in which I always kind of struggle with, because so much of what we're taught with crises is to effectively not necessarily just focus on what happened in the past as an indicator of what's going to happen in the future. I think a lot of the big problems we have is that something comes up that we didn't necessarily predict, and therefore we run into trouble with it. But I do think in this context, it is useful to think about the last 12, 24 months with not-for-profits. And arguably the trend has been more political than it has been in other years as we've been looking through. So not just potentially criticise organisations. A lot of them have new leaders than the ones that were involved in at the time. But the ABC, for example, with the Latouche matter, the new CEO effectively said that they've spent millions of dollars in legal fees in relation to that over a termination of a casual employment contract, which in employment law lands is actually quite a minor thing to do, given casuals aren't kind of guaranteed future employment. But due to the circumstances and the political nature, or the alleged political nature of how that kind of came to be, we saw the huge kind of fallout from that. We lost leaders. Obviously, Latouche lost her job. We had the product allegedly suffer as a result of that. So we could see all these kind of flow-on effects from a single employment decision come through. And obviously the reputational damage, I'm sure the ABC would say, is higher than whatever the legal fees were as part of that. And I guess as we flow through and we're kind of looking forward, new hate speech laws in different states being pushed through. So Queensland, the first one to do that, criminalising certain phrases. And so when we're looking at it from an employment law context, if you're a festival or someone in the arts as a not-for-profit, or you just have employees that use social media, it will just be an interesting kind of next 6-12 months in terms of whether any of those employees are using any of the phrases or close to any of the phrases. Sometimes what we're seeing in terms of when it becomes a little bit more political, we're having quite emotional or quick responses by leaders of profits. And sometimes that the quickness is the thing that potentially brings them undone, because they're trying to, what I assume is do the right thing and do it quite quickly and take all steps that they should be. But potentially there isn't necessarily enough reflection in terms of, is that actually the best thing to do in that situation? And just due to the fallout and the closure of various festivals, and Adelaide Writers' Festival is the latest one to be cancelled, we're kind of seeing this kind of repeat itself in terms of these quite quick decisions being made and then the fallout going for a very long time. And unfortunately, again, not to criticise organisations, but the Adelaide Writers' Festival actually didn't go ahead in the end because of the issues that they were dealing with. So you can kind of see how, again, those kind of single decisions about individuals or employees has that kind of flow-on effect. So I do think in the next 6-12 months, we're going to see that continue as a bit of a trend. We're just going to see world issues kind of come into the workplace in terms of what people are saying. And some people will say what they're saying is political, other people say it's fact, and that area of grey potentially is where we're going to see disputes. The ones we all kind of know about in the not-for-profit world. So underpayment claims have hit a large number of very large not-for-profits over the last few years, and we're likely going to see that continue. Anyone involved in the modern award space as a CEO or an exec team know how complicated that area can be. And so a lot of those organisations were actually trying to do the right thing, but it's just a confusing kind of landscape to navigate. And then other areas we're kind of seeing will be kind of those big kind of litigation matters in relation to respect to work, or those kind of more media friendly, or the stories that media loves to kind of follow, whereby allegations come forward and then it becomes public quite quickly. And then they're, depending on the industry, there might be commentaries and articles and thought pieces kind of flowing through from that. So I guess that's kind of where I'm looking at it in terms of the current themes. But as Andrew kind of indicated, I think the game plan is trying to have a process in place that can kind of apply to as many situations as possible, and even ones you might not necessarily be able to predict ahead of time. So again, I flag what I'm saying, I think is interesting from an academic perspective in terms of what might happen, but I think organisations probably need to think about it from a more tailored point of view in terms of what could potentially impact them, because not all not-for-profits are the same, and the particular issues that might be more sensitive for them won't be the same for others. So I'm not sure if that is a little bit of an overview.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think you're demonstrating how broad the range of crises can be, right? From, you gave so many great examples there, all the way through to really much larger external forces that Andrew was talking about, like things like COVID or other external forces that can impact your continuity of services, et cetera, et cetera. But they all do link back to people and reputation, safety. And as you were saying, some of those things can have a larger risk than the practical outworking of solutions like legal support or other things that you bring in to help solve some of those problems. So it's really interesting. I'm wondering, Andrew and Andy, do you think that crises escalate faster for not-for-profits and other organisations? And if so, why?
I'm happy to jump in there, because my experience is if it's a for-profit entity and you see the CEO on the news, you know that they're trying to do the best to protect their stakeholders and shareholders, and that's the language, yeah? And they roll out lots of legalese. In the not-for-profit world, if the leader came out and comms that around a crisis, you are out of the game, you're gone, right? Because that's not what the audience expects of you. So if you want to, pour petrol on the fire for your not-for-profit, talk about the entity, and I've had legal advice, and talk about all that sort of stuff, yeah, and you're open to being criticised. If you go the other way, and again, practical, advice here. If you go the other way and talk about straight back, our first and foremost thing is to address this, to look after the people and concerned, right? That's what they expect from you as a not-for-profit, because that's why you're a not-for-profit, because you're supporting your missional heart. Yeah, so go that route first off, not the other way. And if you don't, Cass, what you're saying is, for a not-for-profit, it's far more likely to explode.
Yeah, absolutely. Andy, would you add anything to that?
No, I completely agree. I think we just expect more from not-for-profits. We give them our money to go and use a lot of the time for the causes, and that's us voluntarily giving that money across. And so the only return on investment, if you think about it in that way, is a positive kind of impact that they create. So if there's ever in doubt about what positive impact they're creating, it almost feels like a betrayal for a lot of the members of the public. And so it is really interesting, Andrew, when you point out in terms of the language that we use. I'm not sure if anyone's following the Carl and Jackie O saga at the moment in terms of all the different camps putting out very brief, very legalese statements, and potentially that's flagged in potential litigation that's about to come forward. But we're not seeing the kind of responses that we would see in the not-for-profit space, which is talking about major listeners and the service that we're providing and our commitments to those kind of quality standards. They're gearing up for a very different fight. And I actually don't think that people expect them to do anything differently than that. I think when we look at, and Tess will be able to talk about this way better than I would, but some of the data breach or privacy breaches that we've seen in the past with major corporations, they need to penalise them a lot of money for them to care, because the consumer almost doesn't, we're not really voting with our feet in terms of our usage after those incidences. Facebook is some of the biggest breaches in the world, and they've continued to be one of the biggest companies in the world. So it's just interesting how reputation for some things will definitely impact not-for-profits, and then it seems to be kind of war off a duck's back for corporate. So yes, I definitely agree that there's a huge distinction between the two.
Absolutely. There's a different attachment from the community to these organisations, isn't it? There's a heart component in all of this. Really great point. So I guess the takeaway from all of that is that in 2026, not-for-profits crises are broader, they are escalating faster, and they're more interconnected with lots of different facets. They're multifaceted, perhaps more than ever. And so that leads perfectly into our next section. And whenever we do these webcasts, we love to have healthy discussion and talk about what's happening and share information. But we also want to make sure that it's super practical and that everyone can take things away that they can use in their workplace immediately. And so we want to talk now about what a crisis-ready governance framework looks like in practice. So who leads, who decides, who speaks, what triggers escalation, and what do you need to be ready before the moment hits? So let's bring Tess into the discussion. Tess, you have had your own experience dealing with crisis management and have experience helping organisations establish robust governance frameworks. So Tess, in a fast-moving situation where the information is incomplete, what governance protocols matter most, especially around who decides what, when management can act, and when the board needs to step in?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of good reasons that organisations should have a suite of crisis management documents in place. And the first, and this is really echoing on a point that Andrew has raised already, is that getting your ducks in a row in a relative time of peace or calm, so the organisation can think clearly about the steps it wants to follow if a crisis arises. So who will be in the room, allocation of tasks, who has the authority to act. The second reason is generally demonstrating compliance with ACNC governance standards, applicable work health and safety legislation, privacy obligation, and general legal duties of responsible entities. In terms of what government's protocols matter most, I'm going to mention 3 key policies, starting with a crisis management plan. And as Andy mentioned before, it's nearly impossible task to create a practical and user-friendly document that covers all the possible crisis scenarios. So the key here is that this document is adaptable and provides the framework for an organisation's response to any crisis, whether it's operational, reputational, financial, legal, or natural disaster related. The second document that I recommend that you have in place is an emergency response plan. So this relates to work health and safety, and this plan must be tailored to the specific hazards and circumstances of your workplace. The third policy is a data breach response plan. So this policy relates to Privacy Act compliance. We've seen a few recent examples in the not-for-profit space. So Oxfam, Australia Red Cross Lifeblood. There was a Brisbane-based telemarketing company that contracts with potential donors on behalf of charities. So these are just a few notable examples of data breaches impacting charities, and we're seeing this really increase more and more. So at a high level, where an entity becomes aware of reasonable grounds to suspect an eligible data breach, it must carry out reasonable and expeditious assessment, taking all reasonable steps to complete this within 30 days. So this is really quick. Given the prevalence, so having a separate document that addresses data breach response will help set your organisation up for success. And finally, there's just a couple of other complementary or special circumstance policies that I would recommend that you consider. So having a risk management framework and risk register, it may be important from a governance perspective. The next is a whistleblower policy. A whistleblower complaint is interesting because in itself it may constitute or reveal a crisis, but the policy can be integrated when you're preparing your crisis management framework, and it can be really helpful. And lastly, if you work with children, you may also want to develop a safeguarding and child protection policies in that space.
Excellent. I mean, that's so much practical wisdom just there. And I feel like sometimes when we talk about policies in the workplace, it's the least sexy or least exciting thing to talk about. But in these moments when things are starting to unfold, it's the only thing that you want to have in place. It's your game plan, as Andrew called it, that you can just go to that. It's already set out. It takes decision fatigue away from having to navigate those in the moment crisis decision making. So Tess, if every not-for-profit could have like a crisis pack ready to pull off the shelf maybe at 10 p.m. on a Sunday evening when the phone's starting to blow up, what should be in the governance and legal, what should be in there from a governance and legal perspective?
Yeah, look, and I agree. This is a particularly unsexy part of this talk. I would much rather go back to hearing from Andy or Andrew. But look, hopefully I can set you up with some tips to help to help you build out this crisis management framework. And so that, when you do get to that 10 p.m. Sunday night, we've got something going on, there is something that you can pull off the shelf. First thing that I would include is the what. So when is the plan actually triggered? And this is recognizing that not all big, serious moments might actually constitute a crisis. It might be some other kind of routine incident where you're not dusting off this plan and you're not pulling everyone together. So the plan should contain a clear statement of its purpose, what the scope is, its application, and the types of crisis it covers. I'd also recommend that you define clear terms in there as well. The next thing is the who. So the crisis management plan should establish a crisis management team. So this is specifying the roles and responsibilities of each member. The team should generally include the board chair or a delegated board member, the CEO, a communications lead, a legal advisor, and then operational leads as they're relevant to the nature of the crisis. The plan should clearly delineate the respective roles of the board and management in a crisis. You need to know who the leader is in a crisis scenario and who you're looking to and who's making these key decisions. Understanding escalation procedures as well and establishing those clear trigger points for when it is escalated from, for example, from management to the board. The last thing I'll say on the who is it might be worth thinking about the practicalities of contact in a crisis. So is there a version of your plan that's kept offline and still accessible? I'm thinking about a scenario where you might not have access to your office or access to your network. And so are there still easy ways to contact the team? So a Teams channel or a WhatsApp group in the event that you don't have access to internal systems. So that's the what and the who. And then the next thing that I would include in a crisis management plan is any information on regulatory reporting. So this would identify all mandatory reporting obligations under any relevant state or territory legislation and also any obligations that you have under your funding arrangements as well. The last thing that you want to be doing at 10 p.m. on a Sunday night in a time of crisis is scrambling around and looking for the timeframes for reporting to certain regulatory bodies. The next thing is record keeping. These last 3 points are kind of quick. So record keeping, so setting out the process for documenting decisions and record keeping obligations as they happen. So who's in charge of that? How is that going to happen? The next point is communications, and a protocol should address both internal communications. So this is to staff, volunteers, members, and also external communications, so media, donors, beneficiaries, the public, and finally regulatory notifications. So this is Andrew's wheelhouse, and I would love to get his insights here. But my view is that including this in the policy, even just roles and responsibilities, is crucial. Communications is key to managing reputational risk and ensuring that crisis communications are accurate, coordinated, and they don't inadvertently breach privacy obligations or prejudice legal privilege either. So finally, sorry, I know I've been talking a lot. The last thing that I would include in my crisis management plan is a review. So post-crisis, coming back and reflecting on what went right, what went wrong, having a debrief, identifying lessons learned, and any updates that you need to make to your plan for future-proofing it.
Excellent advice, Tess. Thank you so much. Super practical, like we said. We want you to be able to take these things away and actually action them straight away. You threw a question at Andrew then, so I'm going to throw it back to him as well around, would you add anything in the comms space? This is a great go bag or game plan, if you will, for those emergency moments, would you add anything to that comms space or anything else? You've got great experience as a comms leader, but also as a CEO of organisations in this space as well. So what would you add to this game plan?
I would add that everybody needs a Tess in their organisation. That was an amazing amount of expertise. Where were you the last 20 years when I've needed you, Tess, with that level of insight and information? That was fantastic. A couple of things, and I'm serious about it. A couple of things. Don't think that a crisis in 2026 for your not-for-profit ain't going to happen. It is inevitable, right? As we've been thinking about this event for the last week, I've noted three things that have happened where I could have ended up on a current affair, right? One of them was a staff member dealing with a complaint who said something that to them sounded logical and rational, but missed the heart conversation. Number two was a volunteer who said something well-meaning, but it was just incorrect, right? And number three was a piece of equipment that broke down that meant we could have had a crisis. And in each of those, aggrieved people that we were dealing with meant that we were a step away from a social media fire, which is a step away from a current affair. Yeah. So don't think that it's not going to happen, because there was just three this week that I can think of that I've had to deal with that were kind of inevitable. Number 2 point to bring Tessa's point to life is so much compliance now. Which one of the compliance things is going to be the thing that trips you? Yeah. Is it going to be the working with children's checks that somebody didn't fill out the form properly? Is it going to be the psychosocial hazards? Is it going to be the OH&S stuff? What is it going to be? You don't know, right? So therefore, you've got to be prepared. So that work in advance, like Tess said, is so crucial. We had a little bit of a joke about saying it's not particularly sexy or attractive to talk about things, but the risk register is your best friend. Align your risk register up against your comms plan. You've got a risk register for a reason. And if you don't, you should have. You've got your risk register there saying these are the things that we have identified as an organisation that are our highest risks. Don't let it stop there. For your mitigation plan, put a comms column in there about how you're going to deal with these things in a comms sense. Yeah, that's a really easy one for the playbook, Cass, because it's right there in front of you. You've got your risk register. A little bit of work now in the off-season can bring that to life for you, so you're not diving for that. That thing that Tess joked about at 10 o'clock on a Sunday night is true. I remember COVID getting a call from my then CEO at 10:30 on the Sunday night because it was all going to change on Monday morning, and what are you going to do about it? So it's inevitable, it's real. The other thing is, if you're a comms person, don't be a solo player, speaking from bad learned experience, yeah? The best comms are when it's been done with a team. The worst comms are when I thought I've known all the answers myself. The best comms we did in crisis during COVID, I had two key people apart from the CEO who I was speaking to daily about these things. One was the head of HR who had the people lens, and I've gone on about the people are most important. And the other one was the governance person who had the risk profile there as well. So I would construct words and language and messaging, and they were the sense checks with their particular lens and focus on them. So it was a team effort. And then, as Tess said, if I needed to bring in an operational expert or a functional or a branch expert, I would do so. But it was a team effort for those things as well. So there's a couple of points. Don't think it's not going to happen. Get your risk register, align that, yeah, and make it a team effort. Because when it's not just the comms person problem, when current affair comes knocking on your door with the camera demanding an interview on the spot, put all those things in your playbook now.
More excellent advice. And yeah, again, we've been joking about this being maybe the least exciting thing, but it's really the most valuable in our organisation, isn't it? And they're the greatest protections we can have. And all of you are doing such amazing, important work in your not-for-profit organisations, and these things are so important to protect everyone involved, including you. It's a huge job, and we see that. And so these things are so important to have in place. I also love, Tess, that you really importantly included the review at the end. And, you know, we're hearing in this conversation that crises of all types are happening more often. And so using every single one as a learning opportunity for how to be better prepared and better equipped for the next one that inevitably will come, as Andrew was saying, is such a great tip and a great practice and discipline and habit to have in place as a leadership team and as an organisation. So I love that you included that in there as well. I'd love to hear now from Andy about another thing that often causes things to escalate quite quickly, which is whistleblowing. It's one of the fastest escalators for not-for-profits. And so maybe take us through what you've seen in that space and what should a not-for-profit do in the first few days of receiving a whistleblower complaint or what's the word? A whistleblower complaint.
Yeah, of course. And I think that it's such a good segue into the kind of issues we see in this space is that we don't, a lot of us have a huge amount of understanding in this space in terms of exactly what these terms actually mean. And we're so careful because I think the term whistleblower comes across from movies from the 90s where there would be armed guards and people, handcuffed to briefcase, being escorted on helicopters, and it would be this big kind of monumental, well, there's a whistleblower and then the whole organisation is going to be down in 2 days. But what we're finding at the moment is because of that lack of understanding, we're getting people using the word whistleblower when they're not a whistleblower. Just simply making a complaint to someone doesn't necessarily mean you're a whistleblower, even if you feel it. And then we're also on the flip side seeing organisations hear that word and panic. And they do things that actually put them at risk of these whistleblower protections. So I think from memory, Law Squared is about to release a bit of a 72-hour post-whistleblower disclosure checklist. And a lot of that is trying to lower the tension, to actually make us ask the right questions. Because when you kind of go through a lot of the legislation around it, the term what can be a protected disclosure is actually quite wide, but it still doesn't capture everything. And there are some particular things that can really land you out of trouble. For example, if someone was to make a protected disclosure to the right person at the right time, to the right organisation, there are some limitations that kick in, some real protections in terms of not disclosing their name to someone else without their consent. So those are some of the things that when we do this checklist and send it out, that will actually help you kind of go through that process. But effectively, I always try to dumb it down just for myself, basically, to make it easier for me to digest. A lot of the times when organisations are receiving complaints, or even when someone says that they've got a whistleblower disclosure, my biggest recommendation is not to jump or be too scared by the term. Your first kind of actions are the same actions that you would be if you were receiving any concern, which is basically, I know this sounds a bit simple, but being a human in terms of how you respond to them, thank them for coming to you. It takes a lot of trust for someone to raise an incident or issue with you. Ask if they're comfortable to talk about it in that situation. A lot of the times people might shout out something during a team meeting, for example, and the best thing you can do is actually ask if they'd like to take it to another room or somewhere more private. You can ask if they're okay, like do they actually feel safe to have that conversation? Do they know they can take breaks? Already you're trying to, I guess, de-escalate or lower the tension, because a lot of the time from what we find when people come forward with whistleblower complaints, they're actually scared of facing opposition or defensiveness. They're actually scared that someone will say, oh, I don't believe you, that's wrong for these reasons, I'm actually going to report this up the chain, and they lose control over that process. So I guess, although we'll go through kind of the legal aspects with the checklist, I always just recommend the first step is always just trying to actually see the situation for what it is, which is someone probably quite nervous or vulnerable in giving information to you, and you, instead of potentially trying to be the hero and running with it straight away and potentially even breaching your obligations, is actually try to instead take a breath, sit with it, listen, ask open-ended questions, make sure they're safe. It doesn't sound as sophisticated as you might see in other places, but I actually think that's the best way to kind of deal with that from the very first get-go. So again, more information to follow, but I think whistleblower is just a term that's so misunderstood, but I'm not worried. It's not something you should stay like awake at night at 2 a.m. thinking, did I handle that correctly? If you just follow some very simple things. So it is something that should be part of your plan. So what should we do if someone uses the word whistleblower? But in reality, it's not on them to decide if they are one. It's on us to ask the right questions and determine that ourselves. So yes, try to lower it where we can.
Excellent. So much of this is about readiness, isn't it? Doing the work up front, so when something happens, we've got those quick reference guides and or the action plans that we can refer to really quickly. So resources like the checklist are great to have in our back pocket, absolutely. And often those processes can lead to other processes needing to take place, whether that's investigations or anything like that. So maybe you could also talk to us about what is the value, or what is the advice around when people should do those things internally, if they are deemed whistleblower or not, but they're quite serious, or when should they get help externally with things like workplace investigations or other processes that might emerge from a whistleblower complaint or other situation?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'm just flagging, like, my bias is, like, I run workplace investigations, my team does. So just putting that out there early in case there's a perception of bias in me pushing external investigations. But I actually think they shouldn't be done by lawyers externally a majority of the time. I think there are kind of a few factors. We have a flowchart that I believe we've released on LinkedIn to try to assist not-for-profits kind of navigate that decision. But there's no point in engaging a lawyer every single time something happens to run an investigation. I think that actually escalates matters for a lot of situations. And oftentimes you can lose the trust, because if you bring in someone else to deal with something, effectively you're saying that we don't have the capacity or the ability in-house, or we are kind of buying into this idea that there's a bias or a perception of a bias. And I think so you can erode that kind of trust piece with the employer that might have come to you. A lot of people are scared to talk to lawyers, basically, and not necessarily that that's always wrong, but we're just a more formal kind of arm of doing things. So definitely for a lot of your lower serious, if you've got an in-house capability to do it yourself, if it's not related to, say, senior manager or even your HR team, so there's none of that kind of perception of bias risk, then I think an internal investigation, or even what we call a preliminary review, can actually be a really effective tool. And I wouldn't recommend getting lawyers in to do an investigation. On the flip side, if you've got an allegation against your CEO, your HR team, if it deals with serious misconduct, if you know that the respondent is incredibly litigious and it's likely to go that way, I think it's worth asking the question in terms of, should we be doing this in-house or should we not be? But I do think it is a more complicated question than simply, let's just pay for the lawyers to do it. As we know, lawyers are expensive. So even from a relationship perspective, you've got budgets to look at. So I'd rather you kind of use lawyers for the things that actually make sense for that, rather than everything, which can sometimes be a bit of a comfort, but probably give you a worse result in the long run. Not to talk bad on lawyers, we're amazing. Everything we do is great. But there are many situations where it's actually not helpful.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And I think it is the budget consideration, but also the people consideration that you talked about, and the experience of the process for the people that are involved can be more intimidating or a little bit more scary when there's those formal people coming in to be part of it. So yeah, considering that properly for each case, and it will be different case by case, won't it? So I think that's a really good thought process for people to take through. Building on this, there are other escalation triggers that should automatically involve legal, whether that's in-house or external legal support for organisations. And how should legal integrate into the crisis team alongside people and culture and operations is another thing for organisations to consider. So I wonder, Tess, perhaps you can share your thoughts on that.
Look, I think, we've talked about the breadth of possible crises in this discussion. And so it's hard to say, is there a blanket rule for when you do or don't get legal involved? If you do have an internal team, I would get them involved as soon as possible. They can guide you on whether their presence or assistance or advice is relevant at this stage or at a later stage. So if you do have the luxury of an in-house team, do get them involved. If you don't, I would encourage, if you do, develop relationships with external lawyers. Have someone that you can pick up a phone to and say, hey, this thing's happening. I don't know if I need you yet. And if you can develop those relationships in time of non-crisis, I think that's it provides you with additional comfort. The two things that I think that legal can really assist on, and this is getting them involved early, is regulatory compliance when those matters pop up. That I think that's definitely get legal involved early. And also establishing where appropriate legal professional privilege over internal investigations would help as well. So if I can offer a blanket rule, definitely if there's a data breach or if there's an employment matter that relates to, as Andy was saying before, I think in those circumstances do get legal involved early. What hopefully your crisis management documents will set out will establish roles and responsibilities of how legal will integrate. And we haven't mentioned yet, but one of the things that I strongly encourage businesses to do is to do practice scenarios and to work out what happens in a crisis. And through that, you will develop a really good working relationship between your teams of how HR and your comms team and your legal team all interact together in a time of crises. But definitely, as best you can, of setting out those roles and responsibilities early. The legal can play a really specific role in providing legal advice and establishing legal privilege. Often legal can also just be a calm voice in the room, depending on the lawyers that you engage with. So that can also be an added value of, one of the things that we do as lawyers is we're regularly putting out fires. And so we can offer that assistance as well. So I think definitely to answer your question, Cass, having that interaction between the teams, setting it out clearly in your policy documents about who's responsible for what, I think is really key. But then developing those relationships early so that the team can work together and will just fall into that muscle memory when a crisis arises.
Yeah, excellent. And I think what you said about having that calm presence in the room is really important in these moments as well, isn't it? And it linked in with what we've been talking a little bit about around communication under pressure and being able to bring the calm internally in that team planning perspective that you were just talking about, but also externally as well. And we have talked a little bit about this already, but I'm wondering if we talk a little bit about what do you actually say in these moments when crises are unfolding? So in a crisis like COVID or in any other situation that can unfold in your organisation, often things are unfolding in real time. It's a little bit like building the plane while we're flying it, and information and facts are incomplete. So what is a solid message architecture so that we don't overpromise or under-acknowledge or even create legal risk along the way? Andrew, do you have any tips about what do we actually say in these situations?
Yeah, I think as much for our playbook as you can have practical things like Tess is talking about, like who can speak, who can't speak. They're practical things. You can agree those, right? When does the CEO speak? When does the board speak? A blanket policy that staff can't speak to media, for example. Those things are in your playbook, in your policy, black and white. Where the nuances get, and this is probably where I've stuffed things up more than not in the past, and this is where, from a practical point of view, fine-tuning your radar is essential, and getting help from your colleagues to test these things. There are times when you just need to listen and say nothing. There are times when you need to fall on your sword early and quickly, and that diffuses it. There are times when you need to say, yep, we made a mistake, but we're going to fix it so that our people can continue. There are times when you actually need to get aggressive on the front foot and refute the allegations. All of these things, but which one of those do you play at the right time when you're in a pressure cooker of dealing with things can make or break you. Yeah. So don't be afraid about that, because there's always the next play to be made, but being aware and sensitive of these things. What I have found helpful in our playbook has been, we talk a lot about when we're doing something about what will make it successful. What does success look like when we're launching this product, announcing this new program, going after this funding, seeking donor support? But it's what Tess said earlier about the review process. We very rarely say, what does failure look like in our business case, in our planning? And yet if we actually spend some time to talk about what failure looks like, it might help us to address those things such as, well, when do we go strong? When do we fall on our sword? When don't we? So they're tricky things, but again, you can, I believe, have a plan to help circumvent those things as well. So fine-tune your skills in those areas, I think, is really helpful as well. To Tessa's point, I have and a lot of not-for-profits too, I have a volunteer lawyer on my board, and who even yesterday I was able to sense check something with them to say, can you just run this part? And he's very good at saying, I'm not giving you formal advice, I'm casting my eye over it, and then we take it to the solicitors. But it's just a comfort piece for me to know, yeah, okay, I'm not wrong here. Now it's sort of ready to go to the solicitors. So use that as well. And then finally, I think the board is critical in this. And the board needs to step up and own the risk register and own the sense check to how important this is across the organisation. The board needs to be aware of what their responsibilities are and that crises ultimately end with them. So we can see a lot of those issues, going around in other not-for-profits. So I think that a discussion at the board table regularly, each board meeting, regular review of the risk reports, these things brings the focus, keyword focus, to the table to enable and empower the staff to be prepared and resourced to deal with these things. So it's not a waste of time to go and do that preparation there. No, actually, it's a must do because the board is aware of their responsibilities and expecting the staff to come back and report on those things. And then it's serious, and then you're prepared, and then you can sleep better at night and not get as much grey hair as I've had from stuffing it up.
Just picking up on one of the points that Andrew made about the review and going back and learning those lessons from what you've been through and how you went. You might say, hey, I haven't had a crisis. I don't have any lessons to learn. But, Andy mentioned a bunch before. There are so many crises in the press. Take those and use those as examples and workshop those to say, hey, do we like how that organisation responded to it? Do we think that they did a good job? What do we think they could have done better? So just because you might have been lucky enough to not have gone through it yourselves doesn't mean there aren't really, really good practical scenarios out there for you to use and learn from.
That's a great tip. Here's another practical question on the comms around channel strategy. How do people decide? Do we go internal first? Do we do it at the same time as going external with our communications? And what changes when social media can break the story before you're even ready? So to say a little bit about channel strategy as well.
I would always go to my people, never last. Always go to our people, volunteer staff, board, etc., because their influence is so wide-reaching in the community. Okay, so if there's an issue that hits the news or the social media about my particular not-for-profit, and somebody out there sees it and they know somebody in my organisation, they're going to go to those people first and ask. So to forewarn is to forearm, is that the expression? Our own people, to make them our advocates and spokespeople is a really important thing. So they can say, I've heard from head office and they've put out this statement that says ... And then it's being reiterated, right? So first and foremost, that. Secondly, it's about having a channel strategy. That's a really good point, right? So what is your channel strategy? How are you communicating and what are you saying to those people? Reiterating your story, reiterating your values. Don't forget you're a not-for-profit. So you're talking about trust and about our purpose and our mission and our calling and about how we're fulfilling those things, yeah? And then within that, you've got the crisis that you're dealing with. But don't do that in a vacuum. Don't just talk about the crisis. Reiterate the stories as to why, the long history of your organisation or the short, the impact that you're having and continue to have and will continue to have as you're working through this thing at the moment.
Excellent. And Andy, would you add anything from a risk perspective? Have you seen any common mistakes that take place around reputational risk or legal risk just from communications?
The biggest thing sometimes I see, and again, I'm not a defamation lawyer, so please refer to people that are. It's its own very niche area of law. niche area of people doing it sometimes. But it's effectively what we need to be really careful of is when we're putting out a statement, we're not saying something that isn't actually true. And I know that can sound very stupid as a tip. Like, of course, we're going to be accurate, but sometimes, because it sounds better, we give a little bit more certainty to something. So we might say, for example, that an individual did this, but in reality, we haven't actually finished the investigation which substantiated that. And that's potentially where we fall into this idea where we've actually defamed someone without even knowing it. So that's one area. Another area that sometimes we see with organisations, especially in not-for-profit space, is that we're actually wanting to put out information into the community about a perpetrator or an alleged perpetrator. And we just need to be making sure that whenever we're talking about parties, that we're not kind of breaching our privacy obligations when we do that. Is another way we can kind of fall into it by arguably doing the right thing. And you as a not-for-profit might decide, look, the risks of those breaches are less than the risks to the community, and so we're going to do it anyway. But from a legal perspective, we always want you to effectively know what the risks are, so you're making informed decisions rather than we'll just do it anyway and we'll deal with it afterwards. I'd much rather you kind of know what you're getting into. So yeah, those are kind of the two areas we often see.
Interesting. And so cyber and privacy is something that we haven't actually talked very much about today, but it is one of the common triggers, is what you're saying. So I wonder, Tess, maybe you could take us through some hot tips around that as well. Cyber and privacy incidents being quite common. What are the hygiene basics that materially would reduce the risk for organisations when these things are coming up?
This could be a whole topic in itself, this question. But when I'm thinking about risk management in terms of data breaches, I think about data breaches really falling into sort of two categories: malicious attacks from external parties and then inadvertent disclosures from people within your organisation. So ensuring that you do have your IT security ducks in a row, so to speak, with both your IT systems but also your own personnel is really essential, and just really basic hygiene as well. In terms of reducing risks when you're managing a data breach, and I feel like I'm becoming a little bit of a broken record, but having these policy documents in place, tested, regularly reviewed, will assist in reducing risks that can arise when you're managing a crisis as well.
Like you said, this could have been a whole topic on its own. So some great quick tips there that people can take away and go a little bit deeper on. So we are just about out of time. And so before we close, I'd love to ask each of our guests, if attendees were just to do one or two things in the next 30 days to move from response to prevention, because a lot of what we've talked about today is about building resilience and preventative capability, what would those actions be? What would you all advise? Perhaps we'll start with Andy.
So I'm just following through from everyone else. I think it's just knowing who the person is that's going to be doing the talking, basically, whether that's to WorkSafe Inspector, whether that's to the media. I think that confusion can sometimes cause the most issues.
And Tess, what's your big tip for people when it comes to crisis management in 2026? One or two things that they could do to move from being reactive and responsive, but to being preventative and ready to go?
Yeah, so look, this is probably no surprises here, but get organised before the crisis arises. It'll set your organisation up for success in managing anything that comes your way. And my second point, and this is, I think I'm probably going to be stealing Andrew's thunder here, but if I can reiterate and preempt what he might say, is being people-focused. It's, we see, particularly in the data breaches space, we see data breaches that are handled well and less well. And I think the key distinguishing factor is where businesses centre people in their response.
And yeah, you're right. You're right. Well done, Tess, to my playbook. First thing, have a focus on trust. Yeah. We know all the research is telling us at the moment, in this time of great uncertainty, government, house problems, price of petrol, everything. Yeah. Trust, reputation, and the likes is so important for a not-for-profit. It's what they're expecting from you, and it's what you have to deliver on when everything else is going bad. The good news for not-for-profits is that the world still wants to support you. The world still expects and hopes that you're going to deliver a better world. So there is positivity out there for you when there's so much doom and gloom in institutions and everywhere else. So be encouraged, because they're expecting trust from you. Deliver on it, and you're on the way to keep going. So to do that, just be human. Just be a real person. Think about that pub test. That is so powerful in this country. If you don't pass the pub test, you are history. So imagine when you're writing those comms, you're sitting at the bar. Not a bad idea, actually, to sit at the bar and have that beer and think about the pub test. Is this going to work or not? Yeah. Because that's the opposite of the spin that they're getting from the professional spin doctors and all of that stuff that's coming out. Be real, be genuine, be a person. And remember, compliance and comms, they're not two separate things. They go hand in hand. And you can do practical things, as we've outlined today, to actually be on the front foot and to have a game plan for it. And with that, you'll be far better positioned for the potential that it could happen tomorrow to you.
Excellent. What a great way to sum up a detailed, robust conversation. Compliance, comms, and keep it human. So putting in these small controls to stop these incidents becoming big incidents. And so thank you to all of you, Andrew, Andy, and Tess, for sharing so much wisdom and your time with the audience today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're so glad that you were able to make time to be here, and we hope you've taken away some practical tips and next steps that you can apply straight away in your organisation. We will be sharing an on-demand version of this webcast in the coming days that you can share with your colleagues if you like, along with some answers to the questions that you've been putting into the chat. So you can expect to see that very soon. And if you do need help with any of the things that we've talked about today, whether it's navigating a crisis, engaging someone for a workplace investigation, reviewing your policies, or running training for your team, please do reach out to Andy or Tess. They are incredible. Their teams are incredible, and they have some great resources that can help you in your organizations. So we look forward to seeing you at the next webcast. Thanks for today, and goodbye.